Folks, we are back with another episode of DramaQuest. It is good to see you. Today we have a very special episode, but before we get into that, I have to always thank the patrons. So iFeist and Sabra, our newest patrons, thank you so much. Your support means a lot. You guys do a lot to help us continue the podcast here, and it's always good to see you guys hanging around too. I know both of you now. But now, onto the content of the show here. We are joined by none other than Chris, Joppa, Perkins, the creative director of Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen. Joppa, it's great to have you here. Passing it over to you really quick.
It's great to be here, man. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
Thanks. So, I just have a few questions, some from friends of mine who have played and tested and people I know throughout the gaming community. A lot of them are my own questions, but I'm just going to go ahead and start hitting you with those right now if you're cool with it.
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
All right. First up, my own interest here. Can you walk us through like your regular workflow? Specifically, I want to know what's an average day of Pantheon development work look like for you?
Well, so I'll try to break it down maybe into like buckets, and then you can ask specific questions if any come to mind. But I would say on average, like 30 to 40% of each day is spent on kind of director level activity. So that is everything from meetings to like review, giving feedback on things, because another bucket would be 20 to 30% play testing, just getting in the game, playing the game, especially when new things are coming in, and then I'm providing feedback on that. I'd say like 10% ish would be like documentation, just making sure design documents are updated, asking for updates or clarifications on certain documentation. And then the last, whatever's left is not that it's less important, but I guess, what is that, like 20, 30% or whatever is spent on like trench work. That's essentially actually working with data, updating classes, actually inputting data on NPC population, working with programmers on new system implementation, things like that. So 20, 30% trench work. A lot of playtesting, a lot of meetings, conversations, ad hoc, hey, can I grab you for a sec? Notice this, let's touch base. But yeah, I'd say that kind of in a nutshell captures it for the most part.
And most of your hands-on development work that you do, is that done with Unity?
Yes.
Now, you guys have been working with Unity since the beginning. I've messed around a little bit with Unity. I have to imagine that the version of Unity that you guys now use is like highly customized, tailored to your needs, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, highly, highly customized. I mean, Unity is a fantastic engine, but for what we're trying to accomplish, yeah.
Now, yeah. Last year there was actually, some drama with Unity overall. Were you nervous about that?
No, not at all. No,
okay.
For one, we kind of expected them to balance that out, in terms of the feedback they were getting and where they ultimately landed. But no, it doesn't really affect us at all.
Okay.
Other than just wanting Unity to be healthy, we want Unity to be a healthy company and keep doing well, but no.
Cool. So following up on your kind of like daily workflow, what is like, in broad terms, I suppose, what is like a whole week of development for the overall enterprise of Visionary Realms? Like what is everyone putting into the pot?
Yeah, that's a great question. Everybody has a certain amount of bandwidth. And so there's only a certain amount of things that I can be aware of and be privy to before I start, kind of overloading. So I can't speak for every nook and cranny. But I know for the development side of things and the production related to the game's development, that we start each week with a high-level meeting at the beginning on Monday. And in that meeting, our goal is to go over everything that is to be done that week in light of our, upcoming milestones. What's the work that still needs to be finished? And we go over that in detail so that Rob, our producer, can update and manage the production flow, the Kanban, and just kind of everything that is tracking all the individual tasks that need to be done. And then from that meeting, we are then able to lead our teams and make sure that, everyone is, has the support that they need, that they're clear on what they need to accomplish for that week. And then it's just about getting those tasks finished and then going through the approval process and marking them off and keep rolling. So we address things
Very,
as we need to as things come up. But other
very
than
much
that,
a management game. Yeah.
very much so.
Okay, so you mentioned a person by name during this when you're going through that answer, and I have a funny question for you.
Yeah.
When you guys are doing your workflow, you bring on a new employee. Do you guys use your superhero names or do you use your real people names?
um, it depends, like some interviews have been more fun than others in that, especially when we have people that come in from the community. It's always fun to kind of like have that first moment of like, because
Right.
you can tell they're like, oh my goodness.
Like when our buddy Convo came into the team, was he calling you Joppa or did he call you Chris?
No, he called me Chris. Um, yeah, which by the way, love Combo so much. Such a cool dude.
Yeah, shout out to Convo. He's a good man.
Yeah.
All right. What are your goals over the next like 3, 6, and 12 months?
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, the number one goal, I guess you could say, is more players playing. We want to see more players play. If I wanted to get more specific, I would say goal number one is we want to hit our season dates. Um, you know, we've progressed to a point now internally with our tools, with our pipelines, that we feel confident enough to put a date on it and say, hey, every 6 weeks we're doing this. So one of the most important things for us right now, both for our internal, uh, sense of morale and whatnot, but also the community especially, is to hit those dates. So every 6 weeks we need to be dropping the next season. That is number one priority. Beyond that, in 3 months' time, I really want to see more lore, storylines, and world interaction back in play. It's a big part of what sets Pantheon apart, and what is meant to set it apart is the depth of world interaction that's there and the lore and that side of things. So I want that to be back in place to a high degree in the next 3 months, and then for that to continue. 6 months from now, I would say what I would want to see and what I feel relatively confident we can accomplish is I want to see the rest of the original roster classes implemented. So that would mean Summoner, Ranger, and Druid now playable. I also want to see all of the classes with kits up to level 20, including Mastery for them, so that they're all and several of them are already up to level 20. But I want to really refine that progression. When we do our combat pass, there's several abilities that I want to kind of tighten down and improve the functionality, the responsiveness of them. And then beyond that, like if we're looking at 8, 9, 10, 12 months, what I would see as a reasonable goal is I want there to be 2 to 3 additional zones online. I want there to be more playable races, and I want the differentiating game systems to be present. I'm tired of talking about disposition traits, talking about climates and fractures. I want these things to be demonstrable in game and part of the experience of what's available content wise. So, yeah, that it's probably a lot more things, big and small, I could put in that list, but I'd say that's reasonable.
I think that's a good highlight. Now, since the verbal NDA is lifted, I could say anything I want about previous testing I have done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a lot of people have mentioned to me like, hey man, we've only seen like 1 or 2 zones the whole time. And I'm like, I know you've only seen like 1 or 2 zones, but through my testing since PA1, I've actually seen a bunch of different zones. Like we saw the big ones that everyone has seen on stream, but we've also like broken into some areas and got to see certain zones like
Yes, you have.
the Nexus area and like some planes off of past Avener's Pass. So we know that there are other zones out there, and maybe they're just not ready to show. But I always thought it was interesting, like when we break in there are zones there and there are NPCs there, and we've like gone in and killed things, you know what I mean? And then we, somebody detects us and they're like, no, get out of here. But yeah, so many people think that what they see is the limit, the hard limit of what exists. And I've tried to tell people like that's not necessarily the case.
I agree with you.
Now you recently started the seasons process, right, for how you introduce things and how people can test and kind of experience the game world. What was your inspiration behind going in that direction?
That's a great question. I mean, the Pantheon is, from its inception, it's been a relatively open development experience, and I think one of the places that we've missed the mark is in how open we've been to player, kind of making it a more accessible experience for players. So I'll go back to what I said before. The goal of seasons is more players playing, and kind of the heart and the reason behind season is more players playing, because I think Pantheon it's a fun game to play. Like it's there enough to be something that I think for people that resonate with it, it's there. Now it still has a ways to go, and there's still a lot of pieces missing, and there's a lot more to look forward to. But the more people that can experience what it is, the better. And if you combine that with a kind of the certainty of every 6 weeks we're going to be seeing this world grow, we're going to be seeing the content grow, then I think it's what we recognize is just the right opportunity and the right kind of combination of doing things in these certain ways to where now opening up that accessibility for more people to play. I think it's the right time to do that. I mean, I think we could have maybe done this sooner, and that probably would have been good in a lot of ways. But I think, especially for where we are right now, I think this is the right step. And the more people that play, the more they're able to talk about what their experiences are, and certainly the more they're able to show it. I think the kind of the I don't know the right word, the veneer, or the kind of the what's been obfuscating Pantheon and making it hard to kind of like know or get behind as somebody who's on the outside watching. I think the more we can shift into that, hey, we're going to start, treating ourselves and acting more like, kind of an indie early development project here that, you guys are able to get in on board with and play and experience and kind of help us by playing the game. And we're not going to pull punches. We're not going to really hold that much back anymore. We're just going to let it be what it is. And we're going to let it grow right in front of you. And you're going to be able to experience it all on the way. And that's just been a really positive change. It's been really energizing for us. I think it's been so far really energizing for the community. And I think once we get a few seasons under our belt and it really is solidified, they're serious about, this every 6 weeks thing, I think it's only going to get better from there.
Yeah, I think it can only kind of get bigger and more enjoyable as some of these areas in Avatar's Pass open up. I'm super excited. Do you know, are you able to, I'm sure but are you able to say what's coming up in like the next few sequences, 6 at the 6 week marks?
I definitely know. As far as like actually saying what it is, I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but I think the clues are there enough for like, if there's two other major parts of Avatar's Pass that represent really significant content areas in terms of like both the level range, but also just being more of these overland dungeon type of areas. And those are the places we're going to go over the next 2 seasons. And by devoting a season to it, it's allowing us to really focus on building these areas out to be more kind of fleshed out. One of them in the past, the colder one, was, I think, a little more fleshed out, certainly than the other one. And I think even in
I used to live in that area.
Yeah, and I know that there's people that really enjoyed it for what it was, and so you can imagine it just being even more even more polished, even more finished, with even more content and kind of cool things going on in there. and then the other area being elevated to what it was meant to be originally, which is a similar kind of a true destination, a point of interest with its own lore, its own kind of unique look, take, atmosphere, loot, a true destination place to be. So, yeah, it's gonna be really good to have those two places online. That's all I'm going to say about it for now, because I know we kind of want to do kind of a fun reveal when the time comes. But yeah.
What I'll say is, like, with the cold area that we experienced in previous PAs that I think you're talking about, I really enjoyed it playing there. But the other area, people are going to be like, Zaide, we don't know what the hell you're talking about. But the other area, when I went there, was one of the coolest looking places, like the coolest environments that I've experienced in an MMO. Like I remember being in here being like, dude, this is literally the best. This is awesome. Like jumping
That's so
around
cool.
and checking stuff out. And I think I was like DMing you and being like, dude, this is awesome. This is really great. Like, sadly, I think when my group went there, we had out leveled it back then
Mm-hmm.
because we were always doing dumb stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm super excited. I can't wait to show people and get to do it with our guild and stuff again.
That's
So
awesome.
you talked about the player count. You said you want more people playing the game, and one thing that stands out to me is that you're saying play the game, not test the game. Can you like dive into that a little bit? Do you use them interchangeably, or are you really looking at the play experience at this point?
Yeah, I do use them somewhat interchangeably, because part of it is because I guess I'm acquiescing to what I feel like a lot of people default to. Most of the people that have pledged and supported this game are doing so because they're excited about playing the game. They're not necessarily signing on to be, an in the trenches tester. There are many amazing exceptions to that in our community. I mean, we have some amazingly thorough and detail oriented and careful testers, and they've been invaluable. But I'm speaking more to, especially as we lower that barrier to entry. There's just a lot of people, especially at this stage of development, with how long we've been in development and whatnot, that people are wanting to just get in and experience it. And so the play experience right now is also as important to me in many ways as catching the bugs and identifying imbalances and things that are broken, whatever that may be. Um, it's important to me that the play experience is intact enough that as we move forward, that play experience is staying intact, and it's evolving, it's improving, but it's just becoming more and more compelling. It's not, I don't want to just be like, hey, let's all get in here and break stuff, focus on finding the broken stuff, and then eventually sometime down the road we'll pay attention to, like, is the game fun or not. I really want that play experience to be strong now, because that's also going to be what keeps people logging in and playing. If it's not fun and engaging to any degree, then uh, our ability to like incentivize people to get in and put in bug reports and stuff is going to be less than it is if they're like, man, this is really fun. I can't wait to see where it goes next and how it keeps developing and all that.
Yeah. Now, yeah, I mean, like, I feel definitely the thing that we're doing in the world has changed, like, objective wise. It feels that way since the early days of pre-alpha to now. It does feel like now we are kind of chipping away at the how smooth the experience should be, like transitioning from this camp to that camp. You know what I mean? Like, there's like a level gap here where we think there should be content, you know what I mean, that is more robust, or like,
Mm-hmm.
this class feels really good up to this level, and then suddenly it's kind of rocky, or like this class sucks until level 5, and then suddenly it's like online. You know what I mean? Where I feel like a lot of the feedback we give you is that sort of thing, where we used to give you like 40-page bug reports and be like, hey, Joppa, read this.
Yeah, yeah. Which
um,
I loved, and I still do. I still
yeah.
do. They're just different reports, but you're right. Like, and that is where a lot of the feedback has shifted, and that's a really great place to be, because it does mean that over time we've gotten things to the point where largely the game is very playable. And yes, there's polish, and yes, there's improvements to um, just all manner of things that you can always be polishing, and we will continue to be. It actually matters a lot to us, but the fact that the game is largely playable, and then we're focused on like enjoyment level,
Mhm.
satisfaction, that's a great place to be.
Yeah, it's like the game works. It is there. It is functional. And now I feel like 90% of what we do when we're testing is balance feedback. You know what I mean? So it's a way different level than like every time I run in this spot, I fall through the world, and yeah, that kind of thing that we used to exist and exists in every game
Mhm.
early on.
Oh my
Are
gosh,
there
I
any?
remember. Sorry, I got to interject because
Yeah.
I remember you specifically being really frustrated one time back in like PA3 or PA4
Hmm.
when we were doing Black Rose Keep because the zone kept crashing,
Oh,
or
yeah,
and
yeah.
your character, your abilities kept getting like grayed out, or like they weren't responding. And I just I remember you getting some PMs from you like, I'm really frustrated right now. And I get it, and I was feeling the same thing because there was a lot going on back then. But yeah, it's nice to not be getting those kinds of messages as much anymore.
Yeah. Are there any other benchmarks that you haven't really touched on in terms of strictly what you look for to indicate the level of success in seasons?
I mean, I benchmarks.
Like when you look, I assume like every Monday you guys kind of review the previous week, the season, or maybe every Friday you do something like that. And what makes you say like, all right, this week of testing was a success, or like the launch of season one, this previous 2 week period? What makes you look at that and say that was really good, and these are the reasons why
Yeah,
it was good, or these are the things that sucked?
yeah. I mean, part of that is numbers, and numbers, aren't the be all end all right now. How many people are logging in and playing, but they do matter. And when we see the numbers we saw at the start of season one were very encouraging, very, very encouraging. And so one of the things we're looking for, and we'll need to get a few more seasons in before we can discern like any like real valid trending. But the once we get a few seasons in, if our numbers continue to go up and to the right when it comes to especially the launches of these seasons, because there's a lot of people still that they don't want to spoil the game for themselves. They want to keep as many things untarnished, and that totally understand that. So we expect to see a huge surge on day one, or week one of these things, and then it fall off. um, as long as that continues and it trends up, then that's one of the major benchmarks we're looking for. Is the game is compelling enough that people are coming back, they're wanting to see and engage in the content, or at least continuing to see how things are developing. um, Another, I guess, benchmark would be, um, you mentioned specifically content consumption, and a big part of that for me is what I've always referred to as like just the player push kind of mechanic, where you've got however many players are currently supported, which we do have server caps right now on how many total players can be on, and that's not a technical limitation. That's just a content consideration.
That's what I
Where,
was going to ask. Actually, I was going to ask you that next, because I noticed you've spun up a number of servers sort of dynamically as we played. Like there was a day where we had to pop up another one. There was that one day where there's like 3 or 4 servers up, and my friends were like, "Man, I hope that the server doesn't cap at like 400 people." And I was like, "I feel like it's more thrown fast caps at 300 people. It becomes
that's
non-playable, right?
that's
If
right.
you put 300 people in North Kanos, nobody's actually testing
No one's
anything
getting
except
anything
for
done. Exactly
yeah,
right. No, you're right on. That's exactly what it is. It has nothing to do with server capacity. Our servers can handle a whole lot more people than we will eventually cap it at anyway.
yeah."
Because yeah, the content, you don't want a swarm of locusts, kind of raising everything in their path when there's 10,000 people on a server. Just like there's nothing to get done. So we've capped the servers right now based on the content that's available. It was at 120 players when it was just thrown fast. We bumped it up to 150 when Orange Zone of AVP opened up, and then we even dynamically increased that cap that same day until we inched up to about 180, or maybe even been closer to 200, um, before we started spinning up some of the other servers. And that's proving our tech and kind of our back end stuff. But it's also, yeah, it's to make sure that the testing experience is profitable for you guys, that you're able to get in and actually get things done. And it's also us monitoring how content consumption bottlenecks player migration, and this push, this camp is saturated, this camp's saturated, so we got to go somewhere else. Where is that going to be? Are there enough places to go to? When does that start falling off? That's all really, really important feedback for us. And so definitely expect that dance to continue as more places open up. We'll be increasing that cap, and then we'll kind of be just monitoring how are these POIs big enough? Are there enough of them? And that's all really important feedback for us. Um, we don't have like a benchmark for like these are how many anything like this, how many bugs we want to be squashing per week, per month, or per season. Again, some of those things might become more consistent and trendable as we get into things. But certainly bug fixes and, isolating things like that and getting them fixed is a big deal. But yeah, I would say those are kind of our current benchmarks at the moment. Ask me that again in 2 or 3 months, and I might have more of an answer, more specifics there.
Okay. So a couple of months ago, you guys ended the verbal non-disclosure agreement for Pantheon, so people could talk about their gameplay experiences. They just couldn't show like video or screenshots. And for a long time, people weren't even supposed to be taking screenshots, but you can't control those things. But my question is, what motivated you guys to, after all this time, drop the verbal? And do you think it has been beneficial?
It's definitely been beneficial.
Yeah.
Definitely been beneficial. And kind of what I was getting at earlier with seasons, everything's shifting towards players having more access to the game, both to play it and to talk about it. And, so it just kind of went hand in hand for us that it's time for us to make peace with the fact that as much as we feel like we're gaining by keeping things behind closed doors until we feel like they're ready to show, the reality is there is so much here to show. And even if it's rough, it's better than, keeping things, because one of the things that I've found, and I would say that most of us would attest to, is that holding things back for the sake of, having something more significant to show at a certain point is not a very good way to manage expectations. And ultimately was doing a disservice to how much development on the game was being done, because people playing the game is the most important thing when you're making a video game. Imagine that. There's nothing that you can say or do that's more effective than just the fact that people are playing your game. So people being able to play it and talk about it and actually attest to the fact that they're doing that and being able to talk about the good things that they're experiencing, the good directions they see things going, that is doing a world of good, as opposed to just leaving it in the hands of the imagination. So, it's been absolutely the right move for us.
Yeah, I think there's a period of time really early on when it helps to be like totally black out about things. But there were countless times when I would see people arguing just like really inane things on like public forums or in Discords. And I'd be like, I want to argue with this person, but I don't want to get myself in trouble here. You know what I mean? But they're like so wrong about certain things.
Yeah.
And you just want to like, as a tester or a backer, you just want to be able to defend the game. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And at least if people want to hate on it or have an opinion, let them have an informed opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And come to it that way. But I agree with you. And I think, over the time that Pantheon has been in development, the way the gaming community has looked at early access content in general has shifted. You know what I mean? The culture has changed and what people expect when you put early access up. And now it ranges from everywhere to like people launch games in early access that they never intend to call it real. Like some games never have a launch. They're just forever going to be in early access and that's it. But they're like finished games. Mm-hmm. And then there are games that you play in early access and you're like, okay, I really like where the game is and I look forward to where it'll go. And then the game goes there over the course of years. So I don't think in 2016, the gaming community was at that point where they were like willing to accept that sort of perspective, or at least a lot of folks weren't.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you completely. We've just seen too many games do that successfully to know now that there actually is a way to work. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Subnautica, in the way that they originally launched their early access and they had like something like 3 or 4 years of people playing the game, it, talking about it, sharing about it, all kinds of myths and legends, growing about certain areas that were unfinished. And it was a beautiful thing. And I think games like that paving the way to show you can have a player base that's fully on board and playing while the game is built out. That's just kind of, yeah, it's the right call.
There was a game called Kenshi that launched. Well, I mean, it went into pre-alpha, or it's pre-alpha state on Steam like a million years ago, and I got it because it looked cool, and I couldn't play it when I first bought it because like it ran like crap, It was like a big desert. You could barely do anything. And I would keep going back to it every like, I don't know, like 8 months and check it out. And it got better and better. And it got to the point where it was like, it's one of my favorite games now. And
Mm.
it's fully released, but on the way to full release, it basically just did 4 or 5 huge content patches. And I would like play the game, do everything I could do, hundreds of hours, and then I'd put it down. They would release a new fresh batch of content. And I would repeat that process. I've probably got like 1,000 hours played on this game because I redid it every time.
Nice.
And I mean, yeah, that thing is what changed my perspective about, how this goes.
Yeah. That's a great example.
What have been like some of your biggest issues, hurdles that you've had to overcome throughout your whole time developing Pantheon?
Hmm. I mean, I would say one of them is open development. As much as we're talking about it here as like a really good thing, and the way that we're embracing it now, I think is phenomenal. But there have been a lot of times based on the way that we had been doing things where it was very challenging, and specifically managing expectations, managing the expectations of the community, and squaring that with where we were at when we would face setbacks internally, be it a technological setback or kind of an unforeseen outcome that we've got to kind of walk back and figure things out. Previously, before we had kind of accepted this, we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop kind of trying to gloss over, I guess, maybe the stage of where we're at with things, or how early we are in certain areas, and just embrace that like we are now. It was very difficult to manage expectations with kind of how we were set up to talk about the game and share the game and show the game. That was often problematic, and resulted in a lot of stress that we felt internally. And because our community matters a lot, and it really matters a lot to us how the community is feeling about the game. So the times where that would cause dips in community morale or goodwill or things like that were really challenging. And we faced some more things like that even recently as we've kind of been navigating certain things, and it's always tough. I mean, that's been a big. I wouldn't call that so much a hurdle as much as that's been just it's been a challenge. I think the hurdles have been probably a lot of those have been wrestling with the engine itself and really finding ways to do the things that we need to do. I can't say enough how thankful I am for Kyle, our lead programmer, because his knowledge of Unity and just his general programming talent and skill has allowed us to find ways to customize solutions that I don't know that there would have been a solution to before, and subsequently the nature of the game that we're trying to build would have had to have changed and pretty dramatically to scale things back to such a large degree that we could have been confident in launching a product and calling it stable and performant. So that's been huge, helping us overcome a lot of those hurdles. And then I guess, I don't want to, it's not an excuse, or it's not like we've just always had kind of a scrappy, lean team, that's just kind of the nature of this development, and it has pros and cons. But there are times when that can feel like a hurdle because of how much we would like to be getting done. And yet, the number of headcount we have to throw at any given thing is what it is. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think with the community piece, people don't realize that even well-intentioned things can be a source of stress. You know what I mean? Like when I'm sure your DMs must look insane because like I play normal games as a person with no responsibility. I just like lead guilds, and I'm getting hundreds of DMs. And it's like, even at a certain point when you are so inundated with feedback, especially potentially critical feedback, the human mind just can only process so much of it. You know what I mean? And it just creates a lot of stress, I'm sure. So I definitely, I feel for you guys in that way.
Yeah. I'm cursed with being a perpetual optimist, and so I tend to not get dragged down as much with that. In fact, I like critical feedback. I like engaging in critical feedback myself because it's how I process and think. Um, so it's helpful. The thing
We
that
are
can be
we are
really,
lucky that you are the guy there then, because a lot of people are not built
yeah.
that way.
Well, the thing that can be really taxing about it is how often I agree with the feedback and the angst that comes from not yet being able to do things about it.
Right.
It's that can be pretty taxing because it's like I know I agree I agree I agree we're gonna get there. It's just like it's just gonna take a little more time, and which
How
again,
often
so much of this circles back to seasons and how it's like it's so good to have something in place now where we can say, listen, yes, there's a long list of things that we need to get to that need to be improved, that need to be fixed, whatever, but we now have something concrete that
right.
we can always say, listen, we're always moving forward, tangibly moving forward, even while these things still wait their time. Sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
I mean, even right now, we see patches like every week, maybe more than every week sometimes. So like, there's always visible development happening. I forgot what I was gonna mention, but it's not a big deal. So
It'll come back.
yeah, it will. But yeah, I'm really grateful that you're in that spot because of that. How often do you here it is? Here, how often do you run into players who are like they have a misunderstanding of how the development process works, and they think it's going to be like really easy. Like, why don't you just throw that extra type in does 20% more damage on the paladin mastery thing, and then it's done. Why isn't that done between this session and the next session? Does that happen a lot?
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah. And the funny thing about it is, past me, um, I would have been doing a lot of that. Would just been hopping in and like doing this and doing that, and doing this and all that stuff. And um, a lot of what we've been trying to do internally as a team is trying to discipline and self-discipline to where we truly kind of bow to a plan. And the beauty of a plan, even though yeah, in the short term you can get a lot of like things done and just be knocking a lot of stuff off, but the beauty of a plan is that everything has its time and everything is marching along. So it's even though things aren't progressing in these areas and these things that are seemingly small, hey, just bust it out, but things are always progressing, and they're progressing according to a logic that actually is beautiful and actually makes overall a lot of sense. So it's been a growth curve for me a little bit, and even as a team, it's been really good over the last couple of years to kind of be more and more all kind of bowing to this overall need for a master plan that accommodates for all everything big and small. Um, it is frustrating, I know, from the outside looking in, because some of these are very small. Um, but it's important to just remember and trust that all of these things have their time, they have their place, and they will happen eventually.
Okay, yeah. Now, I don't, well, maybe like 6 or 8 months ago, it feels like we saw a change in the art direction for the game. And to be honest, when I saw the screenshots of it, I was like,
You
"Oh
loved it.
no!" Yeah, I was like in dismay. But when I saw it in game and I got to see it in motion, something about it just clicks. It works for me. I'm not a big graphics guy, but I've heard a lot of people have the same thing. Like when we saw the screenshots, we're like, "What in the world?" And then in game, it works. Everything works. There's verisimilitude there. Can you talk to us about what was behind that change in art style?
Yeah, well, I mean, the simplification was one thing, and that maybe sounds bad, but simplifying the art style allowed us to simplify our textures, simplify our geometry to the degree where, from a performance standpoint, there are very tangible gains to going this route. And at the end of the day, um, I only have to point as far as Vanguard to say, like, Vanguard would have fared much better had it been a little less pretty for its time and more performant than vice versa. And I say that not even to say that what we have and where we're ultimately going with it isn't going to be pretty, because I think ultimately it's going to be fantastic. But from the place of simplifying the geometry and simplifying the style to where the texture memory, and just the overall geometry approach can be simplified, save on polys, save on said texture memory and things like that. It is a performance gain for us, and performance is, at the end of the day, like, performance is what matters in a lot of ways. Um, having plenty of content and good performance, that's where we need to be. But from a more like, I guess, the less utilitarian or practical side of things, what it's allowed us to do is unify as well, unify our visuals. And um, even though I will say, yeah, there were certain vistas and certain moments in the old art style that really were pretty awesome. The reality is, it was kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, with varying degrees of detail and resolution and realism versus not as much. That what we have now, and I think why, when you say, when I get in and play it, it kind of clicks, is because it has this unified consistency now that was missing. Where we need to go now, and where we're actually in the process of, we're actually starting our lighting tweaks this week. And so, some people listening may not have heard me say this, but we're trying to move our lighting a little bit more towards the realistic side, because we want to find that a little bit of a nicer blend between the stylization and the realism, because I think there's something really powerful there that we can land on. And we're starting that this week. And with that, we don't want a stylized look that is like, well, let me say it this way. We want a gritty game. Like, we want a game that's moody. We want a game that supports the depth of the lore that's in place. I mean, a lot of the lore that has been written for Pantheon is very heavy. It's very deep. We need a world that supports that, and therefore we need grit. We need the opportunity for darkness, for things that are disturbing, for things that are unsettling. We need all that stuff, and so we have to have an art style that supports that. And so we've made the big broad change. Now we're systematically working through smaller form changes, both with lighting, with some of our geometry, like the human character, for example. After finishing the ogre, we're going back and kind of making a few tweaks to the human to make them a little less like stickly, give them a little more meat, a little more, kind of make them a little bit more substantial. And what we're doing with the armor and various things, we're really trying to drive a weightiness and a soberness, and kind of get closer back to the mood that we have before, but with this change intact. So I think it's going to be really good. I think all said and done, even people who are currently on the fence or maybe have written it off, I think we're going to be able to walk enough steps back towards the spirit of the weight and the mood of the old style that we'll get the best of both worlds. That's the hope.
Right. Yeah. I think it's important that people understand, like, the visuals are by no means a finished product right now. But when you talked about performance enhancement, I mean, I have absolutely seen performance gains with the art style change. I mean, like, really substantial ones in certain areas. Like, when you're looking at those big vistas in the old style, it looked great, but I mean, it still looks great now. Like, the vista is still there. It's just like a different texture, basically, as a layman. And this texture doesn't generate 20 frames loss. You know what I mean? Like, when I look out there. So for me, I'm loving that. You know what I mean? The gameplay is smooth. I'm excited to see what you do with the lighting, because it seems like the atmosphere and the mood of a place comes from the lighting more than any other factor. So I can't wait. Yeah. Moving on from the art piece of this, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I have some questions about kind of like raid content. Okay. First, what do you view as the ideal raid size?
The ideal. Oh, man. Some of your questions, you sent me these questions beforehand, and some of them I purposely didn't look at because I wanted to be able to answer it raw. This is one of them. So ideal raid size. I've said some things in the past, and my past statement was 12 24, and 40, which I later corrected to 36, was my answer then, not to the ideal raid size, but just what are the raid sizes going to be? What is the raid content going to be tuned around? I will say this. My stance on that has kind of evolved because I've been able to have a lot of really good conversations and get some good feedback from a lot of guilds that do some heavy raiding. And there's a strong push for, in general, raid sizes that are larger. So larger than 36 being, our previous max size. I'm not going to go as far to say that my stance has changed, like in terms of whether 36 would be the largest that we would support, but it is something that I'm looking at and considering. And I think, it's one of those things that when we get there and we start having readily available raid content to be tested, I think that's where we're really going to be making a lot of those final decisions once we get good feedback there from, because the thing about raids in Pantheon versus a raid in like EverQuest, for example, even though I know that in later expansions, the raids got more complicated and more complex and textured, but there's gonna be a lot going on in Pantheon raids. And I'm thinking in terms of the guild leader and kind of the raid leader as well. And when saying like, I understand the complications that come from having a constrained raid roster because you've got, a 100-person guild and only 24 people can raid. Like there's a lot of issues potentially from that. But at the end of the day, when you've got as much as you're going to have to be dealing with and orchestrating in a Pantheon raid and having to pull that off, if you're trying to do it with 72 people, like, that I struggle to see that kind of ending up, it's going to have to skew towards one side. And I think it's going to end up skewing towards making raids less complex. And I don't want to do that. So I think what it's going to come down to is less like what's in my head and just the feedback loop and more into let's get into some tangible raids. Let's get in and experience this. Let's test it, in kind of that playground when we get there with larger and smaller numbers and kind of look at some tangible data and make a call, more of a final call at that point.
I think you're never going to get it perfect. And what you need to do is just go with what you think is right, what actual testing feedback shows works, and not listen to people's opinions on it so much. Because like when the Mischief TLP server came out in 2021, Faceless received 700 applications in the month before the server launch. You can't really build around something like that. It's impossible. So leave it like, you guys, this is just me, like some random idiot on the internet. You guys should just, make your thing, see how it goes in testing. And then guild leaders, it's their job to build their guilds around the content, really. And I think that's how it should be. I think 36 is a totally fine number. And I like the idea of harder raids, smaller crews a little bit. Some of my friends will be mad at me. Shuck, if you're out there, I'm sure he wants big raids. But yeah, I mean, leading a 72-man raid is often not super fun too. So I've been there, but I'm excited to see what you guys do, and I'm ready to try it. I was always sad because we saw the Sleepless. Is that what it was called?
Mm-hmm.
Way back in the day, I saw you and Convo show off the Sleepless a little bit, and I was like, I can't wait to sink my teeth into that. We were fresh off of killing Nashra, and I was ready for it. And then we never got to do it before the refactor, and we haven't really seen it again. But I am eager to get in there and do some of the first raid testing for Pantheon. And speaking of Sleepless, like, does that still exist somewhere out there in the Pantheon world? What's the plan for that?
It does, yeah. It still exists. It's not in its. You couldn't go in and do the encounter right this second because with the refactor, we need to kind of reestablish some of those special systems that we developed specifically for that, and then with other raids, in mind from that. So we need to get that rehooked back up. But the play space, the kind of the encounter logic, the way that the weather, the climate system, especially the wind shear elements, that's all still intact in the sense that it needs to be hooked back up. The premise of the raid is still what's intended, and so what was experienced, the 3 phases of the raid, and if anything, it's going to be a lot more difficult because the systems are going to be actually more fine-tuned, more responsive, they're just going to work more. But yeah, like, the initial fight with Sleepless, um, and then, phase 2 starts where he dissipates and the storm kind of engulfs the play space, and you've got like actual lightning strikes hitting the ground, causing that splash damage, one-shotting people if they're too close to the point of impact. You've got the pits that you can fall into, reduced visibility, the wind that's like picking people up and blowing them off the ground if they're not acclimated to it, or if they don't have like their iron boots on, some kind of artifact that keeps them rooted. Then, killing the prophets on the towers, and then finally taking out the heart of Sleepless itself. All that stuff is still, yeah, like that's going to be a thing, and hopefully, not too long from now in terms of the grand scheme of things, and it's going to make Nashor look, like an uncounted prince that he is. So,
when you talk about having artifacts that mitigate certain elements of the raid script, so to speak, the raid encounter, I really like that. Going back to Classic EQ, which I know it's not fair to critique Classic EverQuest 1999 raid stuff, 25 years later, but just to do it for a second, you have Death Touch. Everyone's familiar with Death Touch. You go into a plane, and usually the god of the plane can just kill you. And from a lore perspective, it makes sense that they should be able to do that, right? And honestly, it makes sense that like when I'm in Plane of Fear, Kazakh Thul should be able to just like kill my whole raid instantly, right? Like we're in his house. He is literally, God is his title. And I always thought, rather than having Death Touch be this terrible mechanic where like you just lose sometimes as an individual player anyway, they should have a quest you could do to get like an artifact that makes you immune to Death Touch in that particular zone, and that's just part of like the progression of tackling that content effectively. So I really like to hear that you're doing that. I think that adds a lot.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Were you surprised over the years, but like, have you been surprised with how quickly players consume content? Was it faster than you expected, or was it about what you expect?
Yeah. Like way even faster. Going into it, expecting them to do it faster than expected, it was still much faster than expected. It's always the case. And as I've talked to other developers as well, like it just seems like one of those phenomenon that you're never out in front of it. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you anticipate it. So yes, it has consistently surprised me, especially because you can talk about like how fast content is consumed, meaning like, starting it, finally completing it, and then having it on, repeat until you're geared out from it and have whatever you need from it. But also just how quickly testers are able to adapt to difficulty and like increases in difficulty and challenge spikes in places where you expect them to just be completely like mowed down. We've had a few nice exceptions to that. For example, like the imps in Helner Cave that Tahom set up that absorbed all the the fire damage and then like unleashed it on everybody. That was a great moment where it was like, finally, we did something where players succumbed to it. And yeah, they learned. And once it happened, they learned, and then they, adapted. But we're looking for moments like that. And that's kind of the heart of what we want dispositions and traits to be, is those moments where if you are not paying attention, then the tide can turn so quickly based on some of these unique elements that NPCs can have, like the ability to absorb certain types of spell damage and then reflect it back into you, then, big, massive AE. So yes, it never ceases to surprise me, but it's just this kind of constant like tug of war between developer and tester to like find ways to try and do that. And it's a fun part of it.
Now, I remember when we killed Nashor for the first time in Halnir Cave. It was like 5 a.m, and it was so cool to me because like someone called you or something, because you woke up and like logged in and came and talked to us about it. Is it exciting for you to see players tackle that? Like I guess the whole team really. Does the team enjoy watching players come up against like your big encounters for the first time?
That's like one of the best parts.
It's like watching a pay-per-view.
Yeah, it's like, that's one of the best parts. Seeing people play the game and then seeing them. I mean, some of my favorite moments, Nashor was one of my favorites because we worked really hard on that, and it was something that you guys really enjoyed. And so seeing that whole experience and then you guys be victorious. That was a great moment. Players finding, secret things and perception related content is another favorite of mine, where they stumble upon an invisible wall, walk through it, and then all of a sudden there's this, thing that they can interact with. Or there's several places in Hellner Cave also where there was like a little skull, sitting up somewhere that was super easy to miss. And a few players found it. One of them, I think, was maybe in Faceless that found it for the first time. And then it starts to spread and like permeate, and like other players find out about it and they want to go do it. And it's so cool to see things like that happen. So yeah, like being in, most of us are able to be in Viz when we mean to be. There's still a few of us that think they are and are not. But being able to just watch and observe, or playing incognito, a character, and just kind of seeing other people play and experience it. That's like the best part, man. Like that's best part.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, back during the pre-alpha 1 through 4, a lot of people probably don't realize the access was like you signed up for a time block. You know what I mean? You had A, B, C. And I think my group that I always did was C, but we had people in the guild in all 4 time slots that existed. And we were in the C group was like the really, really like hungry group. You know what I mean? And we were sitting there watching the other groups test and being like, all right, did anyone kill this boss yet? They're like, no, we don't think anyone got it this time. We're like, yes. All right. Like we wanted to be the first so bad. Yeah. We were just like, trying to scrape up every piece of knowledge that we could possibly get. And, we had a lot of teamwork going on in there and stuff, and rooting against some of the other teams, in a friendly way. So it was a ton of fun. I remember one really cool thing we found in like PA2, I think. There was this underwater cave in Thronefast that you could swim through, and eventually, like really deep in the cave, you came to an area where you come up, you surface, and you're in like a large sort of chimney kind of thing, like a natural chimney. And you have to basically do like a Destiny style jumping puzzle to get all the way to the top of it. And we could see it went to like some snowy zone line, but there was eventually an invisible wall there. And we thought that was super cool. I remember like drawing like a 3D map of like the jumping puzzle, like a nerd, because I am a nerd. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that kind of stuff is really the best. That adventure piece, the mystery piece. So now that I've had my little rant about that, the glory days, what do you guys look for in us as playtesters? What can the people playing Pantheon do to be as valuable as possible to the development of Pantheon? What can we do to help?
Well, one of the things that you said earlier about the way that your style of feedback has changed over the years and kind of what it is now, where you're playing the game and you're commenting on like incongruencies or places where you feel like this class could be stronger, or this, progressional element feels like it's not really landing hard enough, or that's really valuable feedback right now. And that comes from just playing the game, which is why I use those terms interchangeably, playing and testing, because I really want players, when they're in and playing, to play as if they're, like this is their game and this is their class. And this is, so where is it landing? Like, where is it really landing for you? And then where is it not as much? Or, where would you, it's not so much like, not looking for where in your wildest imagination would you like to see this go, like stay within the context of what it's doing and where it's going. But in that context, is it fun? Is it doing it well? Are there things that seem like they're underwhelming? And that's really, really helpful. Feedback on places in the world that feel like there's not enough of something, places in the world that strike you as being really cool, those things, all that kind of feedback coming in helps kind of reinforce what we're doing well that's really resonating, and therefore, how we want to continue to lean into those things as we move forward in other areas of the game. I don't think there's any substitute for just deeply playing the game, and the kind of natural things that come up and out from that are just really helpful right now. And we're getting it from a lot of different people, because people are able to play the game a lot, and we have a lot of testers that are playing it a lot. And to the point where they're surpassing a lot of, even the internal devs in terms of the total amount of hours they've spent in the game and on classes. And when you get to that point, you start to have insight that is just really valuable. So play the game a lot, play it as much as you can, as much as you have an appetite to. Comment on the things that are keeping you logging in. What are the things that you really like and want to see more of? And then just be honest. The thing that has been so helpful with, Faceless, with you, Zaide, and your crew, and with several others in the community is I appreciate, for one thing, I appreciate very much the community sentiment to, encourage us and, to, in with all the noise that can be out there, try and be encouraging. And that's great. But please, be honest, be critical where you need to be candid in the things that feel like they're falling short, the things that suck, the things that don't make sense. It's not going to hurt our feelings. We want to make this as best as it can be. And so honesty, clarity, getting right to the point of what you like and don't like, that's going to be the most helpful long-term.
Well, speaking of that, Joppa, are you ready for like 2 points of feedback I have live that you haven't heard?
Yeah, man.
All right. First is the really good one. I off stream, I have done a ton of harvesting. I don't like to do this kind of thing like on stream or on video because I think it looks kind of boring. And usually I'm not into it. Now, I'm not a crafter by any means, and I haven't done really any crafting in Pantheon, but I went around and I harvested like everything I could harvest for people in my guild so they could do crafting. And something about mining that ore and like harvesting the trees and stuff in Pantheon is like, I'm like, I really want to mine that rock. Like, I'm pretty sure I don't need any more Asherite. I farmed like 6,000, but when I see it, I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to go mine that node. I don't know why I love it so much, but I really do. And as I was doing it, I was like, it would be cool if this gave like 20 EXP so that as I do this all night, I gain like just like a bub,
Yeah.
The one part of the flow that is hard right now for me is like 14 to 17, maybe. I want like one more good, like real solid camp to go to. And that's just a factor of like the limitation of like having 2 zones right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like 17 plus, ton of content. 14 and earlier, ton of content. That small part there, I'm like struggling to find the perfect camp. And maybe there shouldn't be, but that's where I'm at. But anyway, that's my feedback. Unsolicited, but here.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I actually talked to Combo about this last week, about that gap specifically, because what I have in my mind is when these other 2 pockets of AVP come online, those are starting around level 16. So that could be an option. Well, one of them is starting around level 16. The other one is going to be starting in the mid 20s. But Halnir Cave, when Halnir Cave comes back, Halnir Cave actually starts at its top level around level 10, 11, 12. But it's a dungeon. So you're talking about dungeon NPCs a lot harder than normal ones. So that could be a potential stopgap for that area. If you get in top level, you're fighting the drawn ratkin and the spiders and things like that.
Now, just to clarify for people, when you say top level, you mean the physical top floor of the dungeon?
Yes.
And as you go deeper, it gets harder?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The top, Halnir Cave is actually, we think of it in terms of 3 levels. In reality, there's probably more levels than that, but essentially 3 sections. The top level being like the Black Rose presence, the drawn ratkin, and like the spider area. The second mid level being the wraiths when you get into the Ulthiran wraith area, but that area blooms into 20s and 30s, and then the third level, which is going to be a post-launch thing, which is something that is there's a lot of very deep lore ties into what's going on down there and what's going to be revealed when that area opens up. It's very much like a Salby into Nagathan's Lair kind of a thing, where it's like, if you imagine Nagathan's Lair was closed off for a long time, but there was lots of lore and secrets and things that were kind of like hinting at something, and then boom, one day it opens up and there's actually a giant red dragon that's been living down in there with fire giants like just kind of mind blowing. Like, whoa! Like I had no idea that was ever down there. Something
That's
on
like a
that level.
sub basement area where you could see through like a hole in the wall, but you can't get there, right? Is that kind of what
That
you're
might
talking
have
about?
something to do with it. Yeah,
Okay,
that
cool,
might have
cool.
something to do with
Because there's also the cool area with Bloodlich Sangsha there, which is also like that's a spicy area to grind, and it's tough. But yeah, actually, now that you mentioned that, Halnir Cave fills that gap like 100% perfectly.
But it is a little awkward right now waiting on it because I watched some of your like faceless statics and then some others that kind of hit that same point, and so we're looking at what we might be able to do in the interim. That's not just like a temporary thing,
Mhm.
but something that we can do to kind of bridge that out. And one hint I'll give is nighttime will help with that a lot.
Yeah,
Some of the undead that will spawn at night specifically will be something you guys can watch for to fill that gap a little bit.
awesome. All right, Joppa, I know you have a limited amount of time here. I appreciate you coming on the show. This has been awesome. I have like 10 million more questions I want to ask you, but I know another time perhaps.
We'll do
So
this again.
awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I
Thank you, man.
appreciate it.
Always love hanging out with you, Zaide. Thanks for having me on, man.
My pleasure. All right, this is Zaide and Joppa out. Hope everyone enjoyed it.